Next news at 9, Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by the Alpha Wealth Group, bringing the trilogy of estate, tax, and investment planning together. Visit alphawealthgroup.com for a free report.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
No, not you. Not you. Your organization's terrible.
On AM 560.
You are fake news.
The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy mentioned earlier in the show this piece by Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal comparing, frankly, the modern-day cultural Marxists in America to the Jacobins at the French Revolution, a revolution largely run by sociopaths who wanted to politicize everything. No part of the citizen's life would be untouched by politics. New names for things. History starting anew after Louis XVI was deposed. Day one. Erase 1,000 years of French monarchical rule. And isn't that what we have here? She writes of our cultural Marxists. There's a tone of, I am your moral teacher because you are incapable of sensitivity. I will help you, dumb farmer. I will start with the language you speak. An odd thing is they always insist they're doing this in the name of kindness and large-spiritedness, and yet have you ever met them? They're not individually kind or large-spirited. They're more like messianic schoolmasters. Reference to Robespierre. Aren't they, though? And this is a reference to this case that we've been discussing off and on during this past week, the case of Jessica nay Jonathan Yanev, a man pretending to be a woman who's running around to salons in the British Columbia demanding estheticians provide waxing of his genitalia and then filing complaints against salon owners when they don't. And we've learned more about this individual. A 20-year-old woman is alleging that when she was underage, 14, 15 years old, this guy was Anthony Wienering her, soliciting her with sexually charged social media communications. This is an individual we've also learned is petitioning his local township government in Canada to have him and his friends, LGBTQ 25 plus, host a pool party for ages 12 plus that would include people going topless, including kids.
It's optional, but yeah.
Optional if
one
they
thing
want.
that's not optional, they don't want parents there.
No parents or guardians, because they've already said it's an inclusive, tolerant event, so no need for parents for pre-adolescents. So this is generating a lot of attention because of sort of the shockingly grotesque nature of it. And it also, I think, maybe starts to wake some people up to just how impactful codifying the idea that their gender is just a social construct actually is on culture and on their lives. Oh, if somebody wants to play dress up and pretend he's a woman, no big deal. I don't care. What does that have to do with me? What does it have to do with you? Well, what if your wife owns a salon and he comes and says, I want this, and your wife refuses, and then your business is taken away, and you're facing some human rights tribunal in your community, as is the case in Canada. Now do you start to get how this can spiral? For more on the topic, we're pleased to be joined by Meghan Murphy. She's the founder of Feminist Current, radical feminist blog and podcast, and she's written a piece on this topic in Spectator.us, the Yanev scandal, the end product of trans activism. Meghan, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
And so here, I mean, I hate to steal your thunder, but the last line of your piece is, you would think would be pretty straightforward, but this turns out to be something that is not only controversial, it needs to be adjudicated by government panels. You write, no woman should be bullied into touching a man's penis against her will. And the fact that it needs to be said out loud in 2019 in Canada, and I don't think just Canada anymore, is shameful. So elaborate on your perspective on this whole case.
I mean, yeah, it feels really strange to even have to be making these arguments. I feel often that I'm stating the obvious, and yet the obvious is incredibly controversial in today's modern age. So, I mean, essentially, what Yaniv is requesting is that women, these female estheticians, handle his genitals. I mean, there's a number of practical issues around his request for so-called Brazilian bikini wax, which is that it's a entirely different service when you're doing it to a man. There was an esthetician who testified at the tribunal last week, I believe, who does this service, the service she offers is the Brazilian, so the version of the Brazilian that would be offered to a man, and it's different training, different service, different kind of wax, etc. And in fact, if you did that kind of thing and you weren't trained properly, you would injure or harm the man in question. So Yaniv, you'd think that he would want someone who was trained to do this properly if he genuinely wanted this service done. And these were female estheticians who were working out of their homes for the most part, so they would be alone with this man in their home. Some of them had young kids in the home. There's a lot of really good reasons why they wouldn't feel safe. The esthetician who testified at the hearing explained that what happens often is that men come in for this service, for this Brazilian, and want sexual services done, and become quite irate and aggressive when the estheticians decline to do so. So it can be quite dangerous also.
So it turns out that if you may think gender is a social construct, but genitalia is not. How about that?
So, but the
right,
problem, no, go on. What were you
the
gonna say?
body doesn't change regardless of how you feel about it.
Yeah. Right.
Exactly. But the fact that he's, he just keeps going to different places, different estheticians to now there's 13. Doesn't he seem like just a simple agitator? And now he's just trying to ruin people's lives, or do you think he's trying to really actually make a point?
It's a political agenda.
My perspective on this has always been that it's just been a sham. It's, I think that this guy is a con artist. And I hope that it doesn't work. I hope that the tribunal doesn't go through doesn't support his complaints. But, it blows my mind, and I think that a lot of people feel like this, that this is even being taken seriously. Like, that this is even at the Human Rights Tribunal in BC. That we're having like a legitimate conversation about whether or not these women can say no to this guy who misrepresented himself as a woman. He was using Facebook Marketplace to contact these estheticians, and in some cases he was using a profile that would have a woman's name and a picture of a woman in the profile, and then after would reveal that he was supposedly transgender. I mean, there's so many issues that bother me about this. First of all, what does that mean to be transgender? If you're a man and you're asking for a service for women on the basis that you're transgender, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. These women, when he said that he was transgender, assumed that he'd had all the surgeries, which, as far as I'm aware, he had not had any of the surgeries. So, just it seems like mass gaslighting to me. It's like, you're male, you have a male body, and you go around insisting that you're female. I mean, it's just crazy to me.
Well, yes, and but this is a country that's moving to criminalize the improper use of pronouns, right? I mean, so doesn't that sort of logically follow, however absurd this extension of it is?
Yeah, well, and it's strange because the laws in Canada are really vague and unspecific right now. So actually, this case will determine in part what the law will be. But we have Bill C-16, which protects gender identity and gender expression under the Human Rights Code. But the law doesn't actually say, it's illegal to call a man who identifies as a woman he. That's certainly how it's treated. It's not. There's never been any case of a person being criminalized for doing that. And I think that would be a hard thing at this point to succeed in doing. But certainly, if you refer to a man who identifies as a trans woman or as a woman as he, you're treated as a Nazi or some kind of horrible bigot. I was personally banned from Twitter for life for referring to Yaniv as him. I didn't insult him or say anything cruel or disrespectful, despite the fact that this person, by all accounts, is not someone who's particularly deserving of the public's respect, considering his behavior towards girls and towards these estheticians. But, he at the time was on Twitter. He wasn't using a female pronoun. He didn't have a photo that implied that he was female. He was still using his male name online on social media. So this guy is being protected by this massive social media company, by Twitter, for whatever reason. I have no real idea why he has this kind of power at Twitter to get rid of people who speak about him. But he does, and I can only assume that it was because I called him instead of she, and he is claiming that he's a woman now.
It's a real quandary second and third wave feminists are in, aren't they, with respect to trans? And Andrew Sullivan has written about this in the New Yorker too. I mean, if there's no such thing as gender, then you start to run into all kinds of problems with respect to gay rights, with respect to women's rights, and with respect to women's sports, as we're seeing play out in real time as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's second wave feminists have never bought into this whole gender identity thing. It was invented by, as you mentioned, third wave feminists, and I think it's really come out of academia a lot as well, this kind of postmodernist gender studies thing, that where everything is a social construct and there's no such thing as material reality. I mean, there have been quite a few radical feminists who've been trying to speak out about this issue for some time now. I started writing about this and speaking out about this, a few years ago. There were other women who have been doing it for longer than I. And we've been vilified, we've been silenced. In Canada, the Canadian media has been so bad on this issue. It's shameful. The Canadian media landscape is quite small. I've, talked to many of these outlets and programs. Our public broadcaster, the CBC. I've been on the CBC many times, and they've covered the issue of gender identity extensively, but only in a celebratory way. So they go on and on and on about celebrating trans kids and supporting trans rights and so on and so forth. And I've refused to even acknowledge that there are concerns and critiques coming from women, coming from feminists, even coming from the general public. And we've yet to hear anything from them on this Yaniv issue. And, it's really quite, to me, I assume that they're not covering it because they're afraid of backlash from activists, in the same way that I've received so much backlash from activists. But, that's no excuse when you're doing journalism. I mean, this is your job.
She is Meghan Murphy. She's the founder of Feminist Current, radical feminist blog and podcast. Her column in The Spectator, The Yaniv Scandal is the end product of trans activism, which I'll tweet out since she can't.